Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Zoom into Wine. It's time for the show and your host, Ian Blackburn.
It's with great pleasure that I get to introduce you to Helen Keplinger, who is the name behind so many wonderful wine projects in the Napa Valley. And it's been a long time since I've seen you, Helen, but I might say that I don't know anyone that's had a more amazing career track than you since the last time I saw you. You've really gone from being someone with some ideas about the wine industry to being one of the top names in the wine business, and I'm really proud of you.
Oh, thank you. That's really kind. That's really nice of you to say. That's right. When I met you, I had moved down to LA and was looking for a job, which was really difficult at the time. There just didn't seem like there were a lot of jobs in LA. And it was a temporary out of the wine country move um, because I followed a boyfriend to LA.
Mm.
I was engaged to him, so it was more serious than that. And then I met you. You were so generous and wonderful and just so kind. I totally remember that. So yeah, we've been in touch ever since.
Yeah, and I've seen you make some amazing things happen for yourself. You've got now you're married, and you've got a partner that's also in the wine industry, and you've got a number of different wine brands.
Right. So now my husband DJ and I have Keplinger wines, and we also make Vermilion, which is our sort of, I don't want to call it a second label. It's just a more affordable label. And then I also make wine for Grace Family Vineyard, Kerr Cellars, Carte Blanche, and consult on a new, really interesting project in Maryland.
Wow, in Maryland.
Yes.
Interesting, interesting. What grape varieties will you be working with in Maryland?
It's a really small vineyard so far. So we've just planted 3 acres last year and three more this year. And we have Merlot, Cabernet, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, and Chardonnay.
Okay, cool. That's fascinating. Well, it sounds like you're continuing to make new ground, and I will say that for those that are watching us tonight, I think the first wines I had with your name on them were some of the most impressive Syrahs and Grenache wines that I'd ever seen in my life. Mars and you had some amazing names for them. How is your Syrah program going?
It's changing. So I mean that's it's going really well, but it's definitely changing. We started the Syrah with Pelkin Ranch in just at the southern tip of Knights Valley because the soils there reminded me a lot of Priorat, which was where I had been making wine, and part of falling in love with Grenache and wanting to start my own label focused on Grenache and Syrah. And I had initially thought I would try to make a Priorat style blend, but in looking for vineyard sites, I found Falcon Ranch and decided to start with Grenache and Syrah fermented separately and just find out what they make and what they really wanted, what would be the best expression of those wines in the end in bottled form. And then our Syrah, we started working with Ann Kramer at Shake Ridge Vineyard, just outside of Amador, or just outside of Sutter Creek in Amador County. And going up into the foothills was incredible. The soils there are just beautiful. A lot of really exposed red hillsides and rocky red volcanic soils and incredible just rock outcroppings and things like that really spoke to me and made me realize the potential of the soils and the vineyards up there. And so we started working with Anne, and we started working with Skinner Vineyard in Fairplay, two pretty high elevation vineyards. Anne is at about 1,700 feet, and Skinner is at 2,700 feet. So both really fascinating. And we also started working with Ulysses Valdez on the Sonoma Coast at his Silver Eagle Vineyard, which is the vineyard he owns. And really different site because it's, obviously Sonoma Coast and has a big influence of the Pacific and the the regular fog that the North Coast gets. But the soils were really interesting. There were, sorry, there's a deer family walking outside my house right now. This is totally distracting.
No different than what's happening here in LA.
Anyway, just saw like mom and two babies go by. So where was I? So the soils at Silver Eagle are really interesting because they're red volcanic soils, and they're Sobrante series, which is the soil series, the main soil series up at Bryant Family Vineyard when I was making wine there. And that's when I started working with that vineyard. So it was just neat to see the same soil series in a totally different area. But okay, so I'm still on track here. And then our next raw that we started working with was Hudson Vineyard. And yeah, and that was really interesting, and just again another different site and a different expression of Syrah. And then due to the fires last year, I had two friends reach out and offer grapes because we were so impacted here in Napa. And so one of them was Chad Melville, who I've long been friends with at Melville Winery. And so he gave me 2 acres from, or offered me 2 acres from his favorite block on the property, which was 25 years old, beautiful old Estrella clone. And then also Maggie Harrison, who's she's super talented and incredible and generous, offered 2 acres of Biennacido, or sorry, 2 tons of Biennacido rather. So it sort of opened up, you know, it was just really interesting to think about areas outside of where I normally go. And before I thought that they were too far away for me to really have enough presence to want to work with the fruit, because I do like to visit the vineyards a lot. And I'm going to continue. So that's going to be really fun. So the things are interesting and changing. And I think that's something that's really fun about winemaking is, and I don't know, I guess maybe what's more my approach to life than winemaking, but just trying to be open to where life leads you. And so I think we have a new chapter in our wines and in Syrah coming up, which is going to be really fun. And I'm excited to work with the vineyards and make those wines.
That's fascinating. And now your winemaking pedigree, upbringing, you know, educational path, you worked with some great people along the way, and but I don't remember any of them being Syrah focused. What is it about? How did you get that interest in Syrah? What was it about Syrah that made it work for you?
I think my focus originally was really Grenache. Working in, you know, I went to Priorat because there was an opportunity that popped up. I was the assistant winemaker at Fiddlehead Cellars in Santa Barbara, and she had her winery in the wine ghetto in Lompoc, and across the parking lot was Sea Smoke, and I became friends with Victor Gallegos, who's the GM, and we were catching up after my second harvest with Kathy. Kathy Joseph is the owner of Fiddlehead. Super talented and intelligent, crazy, wonderful woman. And so we were catching up, and he was asking what my plans were, and I told him that I was going to be making my way back up to Napa for a job with Heidi Barrett in a couple of years. And so he told me that there was a job in Priorat, and after a number of conversations, I agreed. I accepted the job, was offered the job, accepted the job, went to the Priorat. And I did that because I loved those wines, and I was really drinking them a lot and very interested in the story of the Priorat, and also loved Rhone. And so when I was there, I made Grenache from 6 or 7 different sites, maybe more than that. Let's see, 4, 5, 6, yeah, maybe more like 8 sites. And the expressions were really, really different. And that was really what drove me to want to make single vineyard wines and to come back to Napa, where I was going to be working with Heidi Barrett
Yeah.
and Dave Averill at Kenzo, and to look for fruit to start my own label. So I started looking around and looked at a lot of vineyards, and then found Pelkin, which I'd already talked about. And they had Grenache and Syrah. And so I started with those two varieties. And so I think I started out more in love with Grenache, but I love the expression of the fruit from different sites. And Syrah is really fun to make. I think especially when you're looking at sites that aren't just focused on the jamminess of Syrah, and I think for both of those varieties, it's also really fun to work with some percentage of whole cluster and just add, it's like cooking a little bit, it's adding a little bit of spice and a little bit, it's still an expression of the vineyard, but it's a different expression of the vineyard than just the fruit.
When you said that you went to Priorat to explore your inner Priorat, I remember a conversation I had with Victor, and he was making Priorat as well. Is that the brand you went to work with? Is it, or maybe involved there? Because that's just a small world. That was the first thing I thought of when you said you went to go work in Priorat. Oh, Victor Gallegos was doing stuff there too.
Right. So Victor and he had 4 partners, and they purchased a vineyard in Taroja, just outside of Taroja. And so I was their first winemaker. So Victor he wasn't making the wines. He was the general man. I don't know if he really was the general manager. He was the most active partner, though, managing partner probably in the group. And so I networked with him. I worked with him the most. And then I was there for 3 vintages. So I did 2004, 5, and 6. And hired an assistant winemaker, and Tony Sanchez Ortiz is awesome. And he continued on after I left and made it until they stopped making wine.
Wow. Well, what a unique journey that would have been. Priorat is really an extreme growing environment, and beautiful. And is it kind of desolate out there too? Is it a little lonely?
Yeah, definitely. I was working a lot alone, and I lived in Priorat when I was first there with one of the the apartments were on top of each other. So I suppose I was below one of the partners, Javier Lopez. He's awesome as well. Terrific guy. And then I moved down to Reus just because, as you mentioned, it is quite lonely. It can be. And so Reus was sort of a medium-sized, terrific city with shops and cafes and a yoga studio and, just some other activities that I could do. Yeah. And then when I started working at Kenzo, I spent either the first year or the first 2 years going back and forth between Spain and Napa because Kenzo's harvest is quite late. And I lived in Taroja at that point when I was going back and forth between the 2 places.
Wow. So you come back and you open up or get to go to work with Heidi Barrett, very famous personality, wonderful lady that we've been able to meet on a number of occasions. And the most incredible property maybe ever to launch in the Napa Valley. What is it, 4,000 acres?
Yes, 4,000 acres. That's right.
And they have the most impressive thing about that property is I'm driving in. I'm like, just to display the financial output of this property, they have a 1-mile driveway in and a separate 1-mile driveway out.
Right. That's true.
That is saying a lot. And then this amazing winemaking facility that, if you needed anything, boy, That they have a winemaking facility for white wine, a winemaking facility for red, and now what is fascinating about that is that let me know if you're comfortable talking about this, but it's such a different mentality with the mission there. Was it did you have to like think like what would a Japanese population enjoy, or are you just looking to make the property there speak, volumes? What was the knob on your inner mixer there as you're making wine?
Well, I was the first winemaker there. So I was there 2005 through 2009. In 2009, we hired Mark Naines, who's the current winemaker. He's been there since, and Heidi's been there from day one as well. She was there even before I started. And so initially, we built the winery in, oh geez, we built the winery for the 2009 vintage. So the first vintage made at that winery was 2009.
Okay.
And then, and so the initial thoughts were, we started with 40 acres in 2005 and just kept planting 10 acres a year. And now I don't know how many acres they have, but it's obviously grown quite a bit since I was there. And so, we weren't talking about what wine do we need to make for the Japanese palate or the Japanese market. It was looking at what wines does this property make? Because it's such an island up there, and it's really a very different microclimate and beautiful soils. And it's a bowl that's behind Mount George, which is the old ancient volcano that formed a lot of the land formations in Napa, in southeast Napa specifically. And so it's a really beautiful, beautiful property. And I think even originally, I remember talking to David about that property and, was it too cold, and what would Cabernet ripen well there? And, it's turned out to be a wonderful experiment because it's been very successful and makes really beautiful wines. But when they planted it, it wasn't a slam dunk. I mean, it was a little bit of going out on a limb, but I think, very just an excellent move. And so, yeah, the decision was more just to make the wines from the property.
Well,
And
when you were
Kenzo,
Mhm.
sorry,
Go
I was going to
ahead.
say Kenzo also was a huge fan of Heidi's wines. And so there never was a conversation about, oh, we need to make these wines for the Japanese market. It was just making the best possible wines from the property. So, as it should be.
Absolutely, but there's so much Japanese, you know, um, personality there. The whole, you know, everything from the name to the personality to the fact that the Kenzo is one of the most famous and important Japanese um, proprietors, especially in the Napa Valley. I can't think of anyone rivals him, but but the wines do seem to have such a playful spirit and a uniqueness there, and it's just interesting to me that they took that on. You know, and obviously the site is quite unique. I can't even think of another winery that's within 10-minute drive of where they're located. In fact, the property's so big, they're probably bigger than. I think that particular vineyard might be bigger than some of the appellations, this sub-appellations, but it really does have a unique personality, and it would just be so amazing to be part of that initial groundbreaking with all that talent that you get to work with there. And just amazing too how when you appeared in Napa Valley, it seemed like it was just a wonderful moment to combine your talents with other key players. And now 20 years later, we're seeing this hierarchy in the Napa Valley of significant people that, name brand people that you invest in as a wine brand, because you come with ideas and experience and wisdom. And that's really, really cool that you've been able to do that, and to consider all these tremendous talented people your peers, and they get to consider you their peer. And that's really a fascinating thing. I just really enjoy that aspect of the wine industry, and seeing the cream really rise to the top. It's really beautiful.
Oh, cool. Thanks. That's very flattering.
Well, I then note that you went to work on, maybe did you work with many projects with Heidi, or was that the project that you worked with Heidi on?
I started at Paradigm as the assistant winemaker, and that's when I worked with Heidi. And then when I left Paradigm and started at Fiddlehead, Heidi and I always kept in touch because we really enjoyed working together, and she's been a wonderful mentor. And so I just kept in touch with her, and she had, a couple new projects that she wanted to talk to me about, and Kenzo ended up being the one that was a really good match. So, and I mean, it was a really, really good match. I loved working with David. It involved a lot of vineyard work, which I really loved because I was in the vineyard a lot in Spain. And it also, I mean, I love Japan and Japanese culture. So it was an absolute pleasure working for Kenzo and Natsuko and their team. I mean, I loved it. You asked about the wines and the wine style for the Japanese palate or Japanese market. And we weren't really thinking about that, but we certainly thought a lot about the package and the selection of the purples and the blues it was very, very intentional and very special and very specific. And so that was something that we thought a lot about. And I worked very closely with the graphic design team on the labels, and that was a lot of fun. So, no, Heidi was just those two projects. And I was thinking, when you mentioned the Syrah, circling back to that, and you said, oh, you didn't, you've worked with all these cool people, great people, but no one who was focused on Syrah. When I was in Priorat, I worked with Claude Gros of Portuciel and Chateau Negli, and an insanely great Syrah winemaker. So he's based in Narbonne and consults all around the world. And he was wonderful to work with and had a huge influence on my learning curve and winemaking. And I think my winemaking really, that was my first winemaker job. Because when I was at Fiddlehead, I was just the assistant winemaker. And so when I moved to Spain, I was the winemaker. And Claude would come visit me, a couple times a year. And when he would come visit me, I had, I worked alone, I lived alone, and I would just think of all these questions that I had. I read so much and was, just trying to use all of that free time that I had to just, learn Spanish and learn as much about winemaking and Priorat and travel and all of that as possible. And so I would just spend time and think of, pages of questions. I would just write them down, and he would come visit me, and I would just grill him. I would have one day with him, and I would just ask him 1,000 questions. And I would go up and see him in Narbonne, and I could go to his lab and taste through wines, and it was really, really fun. So he had a big impact on my winemaking and just my learning curve in winemaking. So
Wow, that's wonderful. And so international, which I don't think a lot of people get a chance to have that kind of, upbringing, if you will. And you brought that with you to the Napa Valley with all the other facets. Certainly working in Santa Barbara also maybe gives you a little bit of a leg up because you have a little different vantage point. And certainly the best fruit in Santa Barbara too. Fiddlehead's fruit is just unquestionable, and so those are just really great, kind of threads in your resume, and you started your own brand, and you've been able to now make. When was your first Keplinger Cabernet?
First Keplinger Cabernet was 2014.
Yeah. And did you hold back on that just because you had so many Cabernet clients or projects already, or did you want to establish yourself in their own category, or what was your mindset there?
Again, just a really organic path. I mean, I started Keplinger as Grenache and Syrah in 2006, and knew that I would be living and working in Napa Valley and working with Cabernet and Bordeaux varietals. So it was really fun to have something different to work with and something that didn't compete with any of my clients, but really something that was, I think getting to make different varieties makes you better at making all of them, because if you really think about it, because I think, they each might have something that's slightly different that best honors the varietal and the vineyard. And so I really enjoy working with different varieties, and it's neat to, different varieties grow differently. They respond to water stress differently. They respond to heat differently. They respond to the vintage a little differently. And so all of that is just more information, more things and details to think about and to learn from. And so I was very happy making Rhone, but then the question came, well, when are we going to start making Cabernet? And I thought about it for a long time because I wanted to, but there are a lot of great Cabernets in Napa, and I didn't want to just make another Cabernet. And I really love, personally, I really love single vineyard expressions because I find it really fascinating how individual sites respond to the different characteristics of a vintage and how they each have a different imprint or a different hallmark. And I love drinking, a wine from a given vintage and remembering what the vintage was like. And I love seeing, I think Napa, one of the wonderful things that's happened in Napa over the last 15 years is a real sense of place. And really seeing that there are a lot of there's so many different soil types and so many different little pockets and little terroir ecosystems and microclimates, and they all make different wines. And so thinking about if we're going to make Cabernet, there are a couple sites that I think are really special that I'd love to work with. And so one of them was Oakville Ranch, but it took me probably 4 years to get fruit from Oakville Ranch. And so that was, that's part of what took so long. And then in 2018, I think was our first vintage, we started working with Vinehill Ranch. And I emailed them every year for 7 years before we got fruit. So it just, we weren't really in any hurry. And we cared far more about getting specific, getting a specific vineyard, getting these two specific vineyards than just making Cabernet. And so, and it's not that I don't think there are other special sites in Napa or vineyards that I think are really beautiful, but those were just two that, Oakville Ranch is pretty exceptional. It's right on the top of the ridge above Dalla Valle at the very southern tip of Pritchard Hill. And it just steps down from Pritchard Hill a little bit. And it's this beautiful vineyard with gorgeous red volcanic soils. And Phil Couturier is the vineyard manager, and he farms organically, and he's incredible. He and his team are incredible to work with. And I love that vineyard. You cannot go up there and not think, A, you're on top of the world. B, you're definitely one of the best sites in the valley. And it is such a privilege and an honor to get to work with both Phil and that vineyard. So,
Well, everybody I work with too at the brand that they call that put their name on is just really, really tremendous people. So they have a knack for picking great people to work with, and that site is definitely time tested and absolutely amazing. In fact, I got a bottle of it on my shelf, and it's one of my favorites to taste with people. So just the vineyard itself is just a really amazing site.
right.
And so you're working with that in Vinehill,
Vinehill Ranch.
and
Right.
that's also also very sought after, very highly regarded, expensive fruit too. Yes.
Very expensive fruit, yes.
I mean, since you've started, fruit prices have gone from, here to here, right?
Oh my gosh, yes, totally.
And did how does that conversation go without naming names and saying numbers? But when does that conversation had, and at at what point does it get to be like too much?
Um, well, I think going into a vineyard, you obviously know how much the fruit costs. So it's something that is known going in, most likely. Or it's one of the first questions that's answered. And so and maybe that's also part of why we didn't start with Cabernet right away, because Cabernet is far more expensive to make than the Rhone varietals, hence the price difference between our Rhone varietals and the Cabernet. So the yeah, it's a lot more expensive.
I mean, the number.
But yeah, I guess everybody has their own, for everybody, it's their own little algorithm or math equation of at what point does it not make sense anymore. So
I remember the first time I wrote a big check for my own little brand, and I think of that, and I can only imagine the size of the checks you're writing these days. Probably some pretty big numbers.
yeah, for the Cabernet fruit for sure.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about your wine and the 2017, and let's get into that. I love your label,
Oh, thank you.
and
I have a
how
bottle
did
here.
that come around? Yeah.
Well, it started with it really started with the Rhone label, which, we started working. So when I was at Kenzo, I mentioned that I worked really closely with the graphic design team, and I loved their methodology. They were it was a Japanese team, and their methodology was it's just really interesting and very methodical, and went through a lot of very detailed stylistic uh, sort of the decision tree was very detailed, very stylistic, and I just loved the way they worked, and I loved their work, and they really loved organic um, inputs and inputs from nature, and seeing where design and nature intersected, and that resonates a lot with my aesthetic and just what DJ and I really like. And so when we sat down and thought about Keplinger and what was Keplinger, what were we trying to achieve, what was our mission, and what was our style, what we really found best expressed all of that was that great wine is where art, science, and nature intersect and come into balance. And so in that kind of introspective journey of like self-identity with our wine label and what it meant and what wine and what we were really trying to achieve, we really identified with that concept and thinking, and found that in the Fibonacci sequence. And so we talked to a few different designers, and in the process we talked to Yagi Design, which is Tomotsu Yagi was the head of, and that's who did Kenzo. And when we saw these three different designers and we presented to them, this is what we believe our design aesthetic would be based around, and these are our ideals and what we're trying to achieve when we make wine. And it's a single vineyard expression, and expressive at a vintage, and blah blah blah, all of that. Tomotsu Yagi came back and said, this is what we would do, this is how we would do it, and we would love to work with you. And it was absolutely mutual. So they're the ones who did our regular label, which I don't know if I have that here, but
I'll put up some artwork.
okay. but it's based on the Fibonacci, and it's the art, science, and nature is represented on the label. The science would be the Fibonacci. The art is just as an artistic rendition of the art and the science, and then instead of the golden arc, there's a tendril, so that's the nature. And then this is also similar because it's the sunflower head, which follows the Fibonacci sequence, and it's a spiral, and it's nature. And so, and that vineyard is, it's sort of the sunflower of vineyards, because it's basically most of our blocks are located in the bowl of the vineyard, which is just like a big sun disk. So that was the thinking behind this label.
Very nice. That now that you say all that, I really can appreciate the mentality of the thought that went behind it. And I only usually hear the word, the Fibonacci conversation. I'm a big I study the stock market, and the Fibonacci number references are always something to pay attention to, and so bringing that into the wine label just was like really cool. That's amazing.
Awesome.
So you get started with your first Cabernet, and where do you make your wine? Are you able to do that exclusively at the Helen Keplinger location, or do you work with a lot of different people?
We have a location. It's not our own winery. We'll eventually get to that. Hopefully, we'll see. But it's we make our wine at Cuvée Wine Estates, which is down in Carneros on the Napa side. And I've been making the wine there since the first vintage in 2006. And they're really great. We for Keplinger, we have our own cellar master who's amazing, Andrew Keene. He's actually my brother-in-law, and he's really intelligent, really detail-oriented, incredibly dedicated, and really just, he's really the director of operations. He's amazing. And so at Cuvée, we have our own wine tanks, and we have our own barrel rooms. We sort of what we have there is a winery within a winery, which is to me the most ideal, because if we were at a custom crush facility, I would be writing a work order and I would hand it over, and somebody else would be doing the work on our wines. But for us, we do all the work on our wines, and the devil is always in the details. So it's nice to be able to have that degree of control over every aspect of winemaking and how those wines turn out. And I think it's hugely important because the cellar is kept very cold. And with that, we do all native fermentations. We do very, very low sulfur aging, low sulfur bottling, because I'm not interested in using a lot of that at all. My lifestyle is very organic and very pure, and so the wine making follows that. And then everything is bottled, unfined, and unfiltered. So having that kind of control, I feel totally comfortable putting the wines over a little stainless steel screen as they go to the bottling truck, and that's it.
Nice. And is there maybe one or two, besides fruit selection, are there just one or two nuances that you have come to learn to be able to, make this wine appear like it's your personality, like it's your product? Are there one or two things that you could say that you do maybe a little differently than somebody else?
Oh, I think there's so many little decisions that add up. I spend a lot of time over the growing season. So during the summer, we visit all the vineyards, and Andrew and I both do this, visit all the vineyards every week to 2 weeks, and take notes about the growing season and weather and how the vines are growing, how they're responding, crop load, canopy, everything. And then we review it, and I talk to the growers the whole season about, what they're seeing, what might need to be done, what passes are they doing, the level of crop that I want, do we have dappled light? And we're also looking at how things are developing and if there are any sections of our rows or blocks that need to be picked separately, and we start thinking about that. So there are just a lot of really small decisions, watching things develop, and then and making those pick decisions where if we find that this end of a block isn't progressing the same way as the rest of the block, I'm not going to pick it I won't pick it together. I would pick it separately. And so there are just a lot of decisions like that go into it. And then thinking about, co-fermenting things, or the duration of the fermentation, how many punch downs, how many pump overs, everything is just sort of, nothing's really made by a recipe. It's really based on what do we see that growing season? Do we think, are we dealing with small berries and thick skins? Do we have tight clusters, loose clusters? Is it hot? Is it cold? Just everything, every parameter involves a different, maybe a slightly different response. So we think about that the whole way through, even to barrel selection, when we put the wine into barrel. So.
And speaking specifically about the wine that's in your glass now,
Yeah.
2017 was, I think, if I look back, I think about the different vintages and the way they kind of hit me. I think we tend to overly simplify the vintage by remembering a particular set of information that's just way too little of a sound bite. But 17 was a warm vintage, and it had a couple of very warm moments. And I think that 17 to me right now is actually kind of the upside surprise vintage of the last couple of years, where we've had a lot of people saying that 16 or 18 would be really the best, and maybe those are bigger vintages or whatever, but 17s just are warm and inviting, and there's something super hedonistic about the fruit, but not too hedonistic.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with that. I always thought 17 was a great vintage too, and it actually reminds me so much of 13. But I think it's a little bit more imbalanced than 13. 13 was so intense and concentrated and so structured. Yeah. And I felt that those wines for so long were leading with their tannins and following with the fruit. And we've had to wait a long time for those wines to be really better balanced in terms of the tannin, the texture and the fruit and the concentration. And the 17s to me, they're fun wines because they're very concentrated, and they definitely have a lot of structure, but they have beautiful fruit. But you're right, the fruit it's not too sloppy or hedonistic. And I feel like the structure keeps the wines more serious, almost, if you will. But these wines only led with the tannins and followed with the fruit for maybe a year, and have come into balance much more quickly than the 13s. But I think that they'll be very well aged. There's great acidity, there's great structure, and there's really nice fruit there. So all the components are there for a wine that can really go the distance. But you're right, I think it's interesting, the 17s, we did have a pretty big heat spell right around Labor Day. And some of the vineyards, the temperatures got so hot, the vines sort of shut down for a week or two and just didn't really do much, but in terms of ripening fruit. But they resumed and they recovered, and as long as everybody did their work during the preceding growing season, they fared very well. And then, of course, the end of that vintage, we had fires, and I think people were much more focused on the fires, but it impacted, at least for Napa Valley, such a small fraction of most wineries' production. I mean, for us, we had essentially everything in tank in 17. And so, what little I had, I think I had Petite Syrah at Shake Ridge Vineyard, but they didn't have any smoke. So, we were very lucky. But I think it's a really great vintage. One thing that I described it, I feel that year was so difficult because of the fires. And just, it really turned so many people's lives on their head, on its head, I guess. Their head. I can't really make a sentence here. Geez. Anyways, my one of my best friends here in Napa, I mean, she lost her home, and she wasn't alone. And seeing how people supported each other and came together, and the strength of the community, it made the mettle of the people in this valley so apparent. And that was really just moving, and in such a positive way, out of so much challenge. And I felt like these wines had so much strength as well. They've got strength and beauty, and that to me encapsulated 17, because it ended up being a rough year. Of course, it's been completely eclipsed by 20, but
Yeah.
anyways, I think the wines are really nice, and I agree. I think it's funny because I think, with wines and vintages, people are always speaking and looking for superlatives. What was the best vintage? And is this vintage better than the previous vintage? And how? And I think we're very lucky to live and make wine in Napa Valley, because we have mostly very good vintages. And so in a given decade, you might have one or two that are lesser, and maybe one that's challenging, but the rest of them are very good. They're just different. And I think appreciating differences rather than trying to focus on what's better is probably more appropriate. And I mean, really, you're just supposed to be drinking wine and enjoying it, and thinking about, how it was made, and where did it come from, and why does it taste the way it does, and what was the vintage like? And that's what I find really exciting. So.
It's probably like asking a painter to talk about, which painting they like the best, or a songwriter, which song did you like, and
Right.
it's a body of work, and you have an incredible body of work now. I remember, seeing your face on the cover of the Wine Spectator. How did that make you feel?
Um, just completely blown away, surprised. You know, how did I deserve that? Just the honored, excited. It was tremendous.
Well, that was truly a great thing to see, and like I said, it's just really great to see how you've risen with this wine economy, and the wine marketplace. And I always talk about how young this business is, because really, we are still considered a new country, new to the wine world, and Napa Valley really didn't start to take formidable shape in a quality direction until 1983, 4, 5, something like that. And the wines of the Napa Valley didn't become really Napa Valley wines until probably the 1990s, because they were all trying to make Bordeaux and or German Riesling, or whatever it was that they were making back then.
Right.
Or Chablis, Burgundy.
Right.
And now, what do you think the future brings to the Napa Valley? What do you think is the next iteration, or the next idea that's going to take Napa to the next level?
Oh, that's so interesting. I think in the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a lot of development and interest in improving farming techniques, looking at, how to better manage water, how to water when the vines really need it rather than just reflexively water. I think, we're being in Napa Valley and having fires for a couple years. We're thinking about fire prevention and forestry management, thinking about water. And, it's a very dry year. We had very little rainfall, and so thinking about how our resources basically can be protected and used the best. And I think, what you were just expressing is that Napa for a while was trying to prove itself and trying to model itself after other regions that were sources of inspiration and were benchmarks for quality. And we don't have to do that anymore. I think for certain we're still very much inspired by the outside world, and that should happen. I mean, that happens with every other art form, writers, artists, musicians, painters. We're always, I mean, intellectuals. I think, you're always, if you're good at what you do and you're thinking about evolving and improving and just keeping it alive, you're always going to be influenced by outside forces. But I think Napa is in a great position to really think about, we know the wines that we can make. We can best honor, what we have here and our soils, our climate. And so how can we best utilize our resources and just working to be a region and have a wine industry that will stand the test of time and that will go for generations to come, and that maybe one day will become an old world region.
Yeah. I mean, there is a new world coming.
Yeah, and it's true. And it's also, we don't really have undeveloped land anymore. I mean, Napa is basically developed. It's, we have so many restrictions in place for developing, you can't take out trees. You can't, it's the slopes, or you can't go over 30%. I mean, it's very restricted, and it's to maintain the natural beauty and the natural resources. So I think that's our next chapter, is how can we do things that best respect our natural resources, and how can we farm more intelligently. And I think that's the next, and I mean, I'd like to challenge Napa to go in the way of more organic farming. Yes, sustainable is great. Let's go with regenerative. Let's go with organic. Let's really, there's no reason we can't. The climate here is perfect for it. And there's a lot of money in this valley. So I think that's, to me, that's where my heart is. That's the future.
Could you embrace biodynamics?
Oh, totally. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Totally. Even better.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, I mean, I think that they really go hand in hand if they're done with meaning, and it's thinking about having a really healthy valley, healthy soils, healthy plants, healthy vines, healthy people. So
sounds like you've been hanging out with Phil Couturier a lot.
Gosh, I love that man. He's amazing.
He's everywhere.
Yeah, he is everywhere.
He really is everywhere. That's amazing. Well, if you wouldn't mind me asking you to taste your wine.
I would be happy to, sure.
The guests are now about to taste the wine with you, and we'd love to have you kind of go through the ritual that you go through in tasting, and what do you see and taste?
So, so obviously 2017 Oakville Ranch. This comes from, moved around a little bit there, but 2017 is pretty much consistent with where we are now. We're in 4 different Cabernet blocks, and is that right? 4? No, sorry, 3 different Cabernet blocks. I'm so sorry about the noise outside.
All right.
So 3 different Cabernet blocks, a tiny bit of Petit Verdot.
Those deer, right? Those deer are back and they're making noise now. They're moving
I know.
in.
Do you want me to move? I feel so bad. It's terrible. What did you say? I can't hear anything.
No, you said we hear everything. It's fine.
So anyways, and just a little bit of Cabernet Franc. And so this vintage I picked, I think 4 to 5 times, and I just do small, usually the first 2 picks are so small that I make them in puncheons with the heads taken off, because they're, it's less than a ton. And then the next 2 to 3 lots were made in, I have these really tiny 2.5-ton stainless steel fermenters that are insulated. And so that's how the wine gets made. And then it's taken down to about 85 to 90% new oak, and then has about 22 months in barrel before it's bottled, as I said, unfined, unfiltered, and with not much sulfur. So this this vintage to me is, just by the color, you can see how concentrated it is and how inky. But it has a really pretty kind of garnet red color rather than purple, which I think is, this is just, when you get those really red volcanic soils and it's up on the eastern ridge of Napa, it's the color that I expect. It's really just indicative of that site. And then in the nose, there's such a fabulous mix of dried thyme. There's a minerality that's sort of like baked brick or a terracotta, which, I mean, the soils are very red up there. Beautiful violets and cassis and red fruit. So there's great depth and layering and evolution of this wine, and I like to drink it slowly over an evening, because I feel like every time you go back, it kind of shows you something, something else, and maybe one of the aromatics is a little more dominant, or there's something new that you smell. And then super textural wine, really fine grained tannins, really velvety, but with muscle. It's kind of, Marianne Warburg said toothsome tannins about another wine that I made, and I love the way she said it, because it's not chewy and it's not it's not dry and it's not muscular, but there's such a great texture about it that's really, it really stays with you, and then the finish is very long and the flavors really persist to the end. So that's what I think about this wine. Has a lot of energy, but a lot of power.
And like when we describe vintages, we come up with those short, descriptive, 10-word type of things about the vintage. If you could describe Helen Keplinger wine in like one short saying like that, what type of description would you talk about with your, like, all of your body of work? What is it that you look for to put your fingerprint on the wine, or maybe keep your fingerprint off the wine?
Just really trying to make wines that are reflective of their vineyard, that particular vintage. And then I really love, the textural aspect of wines that aren't just too soft. I mean, I like wines to have, I like toothsome tannins, I guess, if that's, if it's a super rocky, red soiled vineyard that is going to have structure, then I want to see it in the wine. So I really like wines that are reflective of their site, that have power and elegance, and that also have, I love dried herbs, I love flowers, I love having all of those top notes in the wine. So I want a wine with a lot of range and a lot of complexity, both in the aromatics and in the texture. So for me, I really try to focus on, the farming aspect to get dappled light, so that you get really good airflow and you get sun, but you're not getting sunburn and you're not getting anything cooked or burnt. And then with picking, I really try to nail the pick date. I like things picked when the tannins are ripe, but I don't like underripe and I don't like overripe. I want it on the money. Mm-hmm. And in winemaking, I want to get as much as possible, that those grapes have to give out of the wine without over extracting. And I like fermentation temperatures that aren't too hot, because I think for me personally, fermenting too hot, you lose all of the dried herbs and the aromatic herbs, the flowers. You lose this prettiness, this interest, this sort of intellectual level of the wine. And then looking for oak that really supports and balances the wine and keeps it fresh, but not that you're smelling or tasting overtly in the wines. I think I care less about wines that are pop and pour. Because to me, I don't mind waiting and watching the evolution, and I'd rather have a wine any day that has evolution than just something that it's just, it's just you pop it and you drink it and it's just ready and fruity and juicy and simple. Like it's not what I'm interested in making, I guess.
When you walk into a vineyard, do you know that it's going to be something you want to make because you can feel the vineyard or smell the vineyard, a combination of both? Can you smell the vineyard?
Yeah, it's definitely looking at kind of the contour of the vineyard and the aspect, the airflow, the soils are huge. Knowing who's farming it and what the vines look like. Yeah, for the most part, I can tell what the vineyard is going to make. Occasionally, I've had the experience of thinking, I'm not sure, but I'm going to give it a try. And sometimes that's worked out and just blown me away. And sometimes it gets declassified and goes into vermilion, or we pivot and switch gears.
Well, you got to try things once to figure out what the potential is, right?
It's so true. I mean, sometimes, you get presented with, oh, these are old vines, it's own rooted, it's sandy, it sounds amazing. But, and then making it and thinking, yeah, it's good, but it's not blowing me away. So I guess,
Cool.
we'll do something else with it.
Well, I want to thank you for the time you've given us, and it's been really fun. And I definitely can see why your wines are the way they are. I made this night about your Cabernet because I just read the 97-point review, and I thought it was just really a beautiful review, and hadn't had a chance to talk to you about it. But if I had my druthers, I'd probably have a glass of like 10-year-old Grenache or Syrah from you in the glass, because those wines are just tremendous. And I think we have a little bit in common, because you kind of picked a grape that maybe isn't as popular as Cabernet. I picked Zinfandel, and my little beekeeper brand is what I'm trying to excite people about a grape variety that doesn't have the audience of a Cabernet.
Right.
And you kind of did that with Grenache and Syrah, and to open them up when they're 10 years old and to blow people's doors down.
It's so true. It's so true. We started a couple of years ago doing a library release. And so with the library release, of course, you have to do a library tasting.
Yeah.
And it's been really fun to taste the wines with, 10 years of age or 5 years of age or whatever it is, 12, 14, and just see them really evolve, and they're just beautiful. And this textural quality, they're still textural and still just gorgeous, like even more gorgeous than the palate. And it's really rewarding. It's really gratifying to see.
Yeah, I think that's why we make wine too, is we love to see they're like children. They grow up and they make you proud.
Right.
Well, Helen, thank you so much. You have a great night, and we'll keep in touch, and maybe we can touch base on some older wines at some point.
I would love to. Thank you so much for having me. It was wonderful to get to talk to you, and just thank you. It's great.
Pleasure. Wonderful to speak with you. Have a good night.
Thanks. You too.
Bye now.